Hello, I'm Julie from Spellbound, and today I'm going to show you how to make one of these delightful daisy pendants. I need very few materials. I have some size 15 seed beads to make the petals. Now we're going to need about 2 grams of these. I've got a soldered jump ring to go at the top to convert it into a pendant, and I've got a special bead called a candy bead. Now this is 8mm across and it has 2 parallel holes. Now you can do the same technique around an 8mm round bead if you prefer, but I like the candy bead because the flat profile means that it sits nicely against the skin. I'm also going to need some beading thread. I've got some 9 D and I'm using this in white to match my petal colours, and it's threaded onto a size 10 beading needle. I'm going to prepare the thread with a keeper bead. That's just a spare bead of any colour, a smallish seed bead will do. I'm going to bring it to about 15 centimetres from the end of the thread and tie a single knot about the bead, and that will act as my temporary anchor. When I come to finish off the thread, I'll remove that and I can use it for my next project. The first thing I need to do is to create a frame of thread around the perimeter of my centre bead. This frame of thread will support the first row of seed beads that in turn support the petals. Now, as I said earlier, this is a candy bead, so there are 2 parallel holes, one there and one there. I'm going to start by putting a strap of thread between the parallel holes at each end. I'm going to pass through one of the holes, back through the other, and then up the first hole again. And you can see I've got a strap of thread at each end. I'm going to pass back up the first hole because that effectively locks the thread. It's not going to slip now. Right, now I need to continue this frame by coming around the longer edge, which means passing through the current hole and bringing the thread around the side of the bead. I've got to be careful not to pull too tightly here, because if I do, the thread can slip either to the back or the front of the candy bead. And I'm going to repeat that stitch, so I've got 2 parallel threads completing the frame on that side of the candy bead. I now need to swap to the other side, so pass through the other hole, making sure I'm passing through at the right end so I don't create a strap across the back of the bead. And now I can repeat here. So it's once through the hole. See, that's a little bit tight, so I'm just going to push it back. Twice through the hole. And there you can see I've got a frame all the way around my candy bead. Now if you're using a plain 8mm bead, you would just pass the needle through the single hole 2 times to make a strap on one side and 2 times to make a strap on the other side, and then the rest of the procedure is the same. Now I'm going to pass up through this parallel hole again on the candy bead, because that just takes me 1 stitch away from the last thread strap I've made, and that will help to keep that nice and tight. Right, now I've got the frame, I need to think about adding my first row of seed beads. I'm going to add them using a technique called brick stitch, and that will mean that the beads will sit upright on the edge of the candy bead, so they'll sit like that with the hole pointing outwards, and that allows me to pass the thread in and out to make those petals also point outwards from the edge of the candy bead. Now brick stitch always starts, or nearly always starts, with a 2 bead stitch. So I'm going to put on 2 seed beads, and I'm going to work across this short strap first. I'm going to hook my needle underneath those 2 threads, right against the hole where the thread appeared from, and pull through. And what I want is the 2 beads to sit side by side like that, with the holes pointing outwards. I'm then going to pass up through the second bead I've added, so I emerge between beads 1 and bead 2. And you can see now that the thread is coming out of the top of bead 2, there's bead 1, and I've made a little loop of thread around my strap of thread. Now everything else is 1 bead at a time, which is easier. So it's 1 bead, you pick up the loop of thread next to the previous bead, so I'm going right underneath that strap there, pulling through, and there's my new bead, and I'm going to pass back up through the new bead. There we go, and that's sitting upright next to the previous bead, and you can see that's the strap of thread between them, and we've got the strap of thread around the candy bead beneath them. Now I want, if possible, to fit another 2 beads onto this section of the strap. So I'm going to come in really close with the next one. So I've got 1 seed bead on, underneath the strap around the candy bead, and back up through the seed bead. I'm going to push them all together, make it nice and tight. Now I've come against the hole in the candy bead. Now I can stretch the next stitch across, but I'm going to see if I can fit it in to this strap here. So underneath the strap around the candy bead, and back up through the new bead. And you can see that that new bead is sitting above the hole in the candy bead. Right, now I'm going to start working around the next strap. So it's seed bead on, under the strap, back up through the new seed bead. There we go, we've bridged that gap across the hole. Now I'm going to see if I can get 4 or 5 beads along this strap. So that's 2. That's 3. That's 4. And I've got room for just 1 more. This one is 5, and this one will sit across the top of the hole around the candy bead. Now I am aiming for 18 beads in total, and so far I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So I've got to try and fit 8 around here. Now I'm just over halfway around, because the last bead I put on and the first bead I put on are both sitting over those bead holes. So it's quite a little bit of fiddling now to make it work. So let's see if we can get 4 across this next strap. So I'm up to 10. That's 11. 12, and you can see it's getting quite tight, so I just need to push them up. Now I've managed to get up to 13 there. So I need to fit in 5 across this gap. Let's see how we get on. Now it doesn't actually matter if you don't do 18. What you need is an even number. So 16 will do as well, because every petal has 2 of these beads at the base. So you need it to be either 14, 16, 18, 20. So that's 1. 2, remember I have to fit 5 across here. 3. I think I'm just going to do it. It should work every time, as long as you get the beads nice and neatly together, and brick stitch wants to be neat. It's one of those stitches that pulls up nice and tight without too much effort. So I'm going to check my count. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17. 1 to go on. That's 18. There we go. And I need to join the 18th bead to the first bead. So I'm going to go down the first bead, and that pulls the 18th bead into line. I'm going to pass down the hole in the candy bead beneath bead number 1. And a little bit of a jiggle with the point of the needle will tidy up. And now we've got a frame of 18 beads around our centre candy bead. Now I have my nice neat frame of 18 seed beads. I've passed through the hole in the candy bead, and I've come out through the closest seed bead on the frame next to the hole where I emerged. Now each petal is supported on 2 seed beads, so if I've got 18 seed beads, I'm going to make 9 petals. If you've got 16 seed beads, you'll be making 8 petals, and each petal is 8 seed beads long. So I'm going to start by putting on 8 seed beads. So there's our first 8 seed beads. I'm going to bring the 8th seed bead away from the rest slightly and push these all up to the candy bead. I'm going to pass down through bead number 7 towards bead number 6 while I hold on to bead number 8. If I just put it under my thumbnail and pull the thread through, bead number 8 slides up to act as an anchor. Right, now I've got 6 seed beads left here that reach down to my frame bead, the one that we made of the number 18. Now I need to add 6 seed beads to make this side of the petal match the other. I'm going to pass down through the next seed bead around the frame. And there's our first little pointed petal. So it's 8 beads on first, leave out number 8 to make the anchor, back through number 7, put on 6 seed beads and through the next bead around the frame. Right, petal number 2. Up through the next seed bead around the frame, and we could just make a single petal, but the problem is then all the petals not being joined to each other means that they'll wave around independently. What we're going to do is make a little link stitch just here between petal number 1 and petal number 2. So our link stitch is 2 beads up from the frame. So I'm going to put on 2 seed beads. Push them right down to the frame, and I need to count 2 seed beads up the previous petal. I'm going to pass through that bead towards the centre, towards the candy bead. So that brings the second bead I've just put on parallel to the second bead from the end of the previous petal. And I'm going to pass up through the second bead I've just put on. As I pull through, you can see that's secured the parallel stitch. So this is the second bead I've put on, and it's now linked to the second bead from the end of the previous petal. That's called a square stitch. So I've got my first 2 beads on for my petal, which means I need to add another 6 to make it up to the original 8. There we go. And to make the anchor at the end, so there's the end bead back through the 7th bead along this side of the petal. I'll do the same again. I'll hold on to that 8th bead till it pulls right up, and then we need 6 beads to complete the petal. So that's 4, 5, 6, and down through the next bead around. There you can see we've got 2 petals joined just there. Right, I'll do one more. So I've come up through the next seed bead around. I'm going to put on 2 seed beads. This is to make that little bridging link. So bring those down to the frame. Look for the second bead from the end of the previous petal. That's that one there. We're not counting the frame bead, it's just 2 beads up the petal itself. Down through that one. Keep the thread nice and taut, and pass up through the second bead you've just put on, and that makes the square stitch, joins the new petal to the old petal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 beads to make up the 8 for the full length of the petal. Leave the end one out, back through the previous one. Let's hold on to the anchor bead so it pulls up nice and tight, and then it's 6 seed beads to go back down to the frame. There we go, there's our 6. Down through the next seed bead along the frame, and up the next, ready to start petal number 4. And if I pop that down, you can see there's the link on either side of the previous petal, and you can see how it pulls out the shape slightly to make it a little bit more teardrop like, and this will help to keep your flower nice and rigid and neat. I'm going to continue the same technique all the way around until I get to petal number 9, then I'll be back to you. As you can see, I've now completed 8 of my 9 petals, and I'm in the correct position to start my 9th petal by coming out of this seed bead here, pointing away from the candy bead, ready to add my petal beads. Now, in order to complete the circle and all these little links, I need to link petal number 9 to the petal number 8 here, and to petal number 1 here. So I'm going to have to make 2 links, and I'm going to have to be careful about how I do my bead counts so I still end up with a nice symmetrical petal. So I'm going to start with 2 seed beads and make my link as we've been doing all the way along to the previous petal. In this case it's petal number 8. So there's my link to petal number 8. I'm now going to put on 6 seed beads to come up towards the tip of petal number 9. So there's 6 seed beads, and we're at the top of petal number 9. Now at this point I'm going to join on my jump ring so that I can make my daisy into a pendant. So I'm going to pass through the soldered jump ring. Now a soldered jump ring is just a jump ring that won't open, so the thread won't slip through the gap. So I'm going to thread my jump ring on, and I'm going to come back through 2 seed beads. That's bead number 8 and bead number 7. So it will look the same as all the previous petals, with bead number 8 at the tip and bead number 7 holding the 2 sides of the petal together. As I pull through, that's my jump ring attached. Now at this point I just need to pause to show you the purple daisy. Now you can see here, made exactly the same way, but there's no jump ring. At the top instead, I've just added a seed bead instead of the jump ring, and the seed bead becomes part of the necklace thread. So here I've added a size 8 turquoise seed bead instead of my jump ring, and then when I thread the necklace, the actual connection point disappears completely. So that might be something you want to think about if you're going to thread your daisies in a slightly different way. Right, back to finishing this petal. Now I need to come down and join to this second seed bead here up from the bottom of the first petal, which means that there's going to be 4 seed beads above that join position. So 2, 4 will match this side here. So 2, 4. So I'm going to put on 4 seed beads. Now that matches the gap, and I need the extra seed bead that's actually going to make the link. So I'm going to put on 5 in total. Previously you've been putting on 6 to complete the petal. This time it's just 5. And now I need to do that square stitch link. So it's the second bead up on the petal, on the first petal we made, and then it's down the last bead I put on petal number 9, and that's made a square stitch between those 2 petals. Now I'm missing 1 seed bead, so I thread that on and down through the last seed bead, on the frame, and that's my sequence complete. I've joined petal number 9 to petal number 8 and petal number 1. All that needs to be done now is the shape needs to be strengthened with another pass of thread and the ends finished off. Now to strengthen it, we need to pass through the majority of the beads again. So I'm going to come up through the frame bead and the petal beads at one side of petal number 1. So I emerge just below the 7th bead I put on, so it's between bead 6 and bead 7. I'm going to skip past the point and I'm going to go down the petal beads and the frame bead on the other side of petal number 1. So the thread actually pulls in across that little gap beneath the point. That will open out the petal slightly. And then I repeat. So I go up all the beads of the side of petal number 2 to emerge just below those 2 beads at the tip, and then I go down all the beads, including the frame bead of the other side. So you can see the thread loop here isn't going through those 2 end beads. Just pull, and that will open out that shape. And I'm going to repeat that all the way around. Now I've strengthened all of the petals and it feels much more rigid, much more durable. I could take the thread around again if I wanted to. This time I wouldn't pass through the frame beads, so I'd go up, down and skip across just above the frame beads, because these are getting quite full of thread now, these 2 frame beads. So I'd come up, down, skip across that gap, up, down and skip across that gap. But I actually think that is firm enough. Now I've just got my threads to finish off. First things first, I'm going to take off the keeper bead. You just slip the needle in the hole in the bead and pull, and it should just slide off the end. And we've got 2 threads to finish. Now my thread is here with the needle. I'm going to pass it down through the candy bead to emerge at the other end. Bring it through to the back of the flower. And my 2 thread ends are quite close together, so I'm going to do a bit of a cheats finish off. I'm just going to stitch across so that I can get the 2 thread ends together. As you can see, I've just lost my needle, so it's back on. There we go. And now the 2 thread ends are exactly the same space, so I can just tie them together. 1, 2, and a third knot for luck. And I just now have to pass the needle through a few beads in opposite directions, one with one thread attached, one with the other thread attached, to finish off. So I'm going to take this one up through this petal, do. Just a few beads is all that's necessary. Trim off and attach my needle to this thread end. And I don't want to go up the same bead, but I can, if I want to, go through the candy bead. That does the same job. Trim. And there we have our finished petal, our finished pendant rather. Now this one's been slipped onto a chain. That one, as you saw earlier, was linked to a seed bead, so it could go onto a seed bead strand. But I hope you'll have a go. I think they're really delightful, really pretty, and they'll work in a myriad of colours. Thank you for watching. See you soon.